One of the most compelling changes in moving from FSX to Flight Sim 2020 was the open world environment. For the first time we could go anywhere and see a somewhat convincing representation of the real world. Indeed, we could go all the way down to ground level and the illusion wouldn't break down. Two important technology changes helped achieve this, opposites in a sense. At the distance level we have photogrammetry, which generates detailed three-dimensional scenery objects that look convincing from far away, although the illusion does break down closer in. And at the close-up end we have procedurally generated detail for vegetation and other environmental details. Of course, the broad brush structure still depends on land classes, but the detail is now made up from 3D objects generated on the fly rather than from pre-rendered bitmap tiles. Now that said, although we could land in any field and find convincing looking grass and bushes, it was all a bit samey and there was no real physical interaction with the terrain other than the roughness of the mesh itself. Flight Sim 2024 promised more variation in the close-up environment and also changes to the ground physics. So that's what we'll be looking at here. If you've been watching my recent videos, by the way, you might think this aircraft looks familiar, but think again, this is not the Super Decathlon. This is the new American Champ Scout from the same vendor. It's a similar aircraft, of course, but very different to fly. It lands much slower, mainly because it has flaps, and it comes on big bouncy bushplane tyres. Now, whether the tyres actually make a difference is an open question, and we do have a choice between 26-inch and 35-inch tyres, so it'll be interesting to see if there's a difference between those two as well. So we're out here. This is Riverside, California, and we're just going to try putting this down on various terrains, but all of it well away from any airport. So this is Lake Matthews, which is a large reservoir in Southern California, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and land on top of that dam. Now that sounds like an unlikely proposition, but there is kind of a rough track along the top of the dam, so we're just going to sneak around the back here. We're going to line up with the road that leads us in past those trees, and we'll see how we get on. We've got it set up with no wind just to make things a little bit easier. So we're coming in pretty low, we're already pretty slow. Going to put the flaps out round about here, and we've got quite a long and quite a straight landing zone, and it's not too rough. When we get down to ground level we'll see it's kind of like distressed. It's like concrete but with some sort of degraded patches on. So we'll just get lined up here. It's not particularly wide, but it's wide enough for what we need, as long as we can track straight and we don't get knocked about by that terrain. So just bringing it in. We're not on full flaps here. We could go to full flaps, but we've got plenty of room. So just getting it down. We do, as long as we don't bounce. If we bounce, we haven't got enough room really here, but really it's once we touch down, we have to watch out for those rough patches. I had a couple of goes at this, and it does help to try and to land past the first couple of rough spots, otherwise it can catch you out. And just by way of contrast, here we are trying it in the Cessna 152. We're coming in from the opposite end, but same deal. It's a long straight runway, kind of narrow, but that surface is, you know, it's like a distressed runway surface. It's basically sound, but we do experience some interaction with those rough patches, which you can see in this view of the 152. Don't forget we're landing on regular sized tyres here, none of these bush wheels on this aircraft. So the next challenge is a slightly rougher surface. This is just a track that's in the vicinity of the reservoir. It's actually not too rough a track down at ground level, and we need to distinguish between the roughness of the apparent surface, or what looks like the surface texture, and the roughness of the terrain. The terrain here is essentially flat. Well, it's got a gradient, but it's essentially, you know, the undulations in the terrain mesh are relatively slight. And so the real question is, what is the challenge of landing on this terrain? You know, to what extent does that appearance of a rocky surface actually provide any physical interaction with the aircraft tyres? I suspect what we're seeing in this situation is pretty much what we saw on top of the dam, which is there is a physical distinction between the surface that looks smooth and the surface that looks a little bit more distressed. So presumably there's more going on here than a simple texture map. It may well be that there's different classes of texture map that are mixed and matched in any given surface. And once again, just by way of comparison, we've got the Cessna 152 landing on the same surface. Again, just randomly we're going in the opposite direction, but it's the same surface. And again, don't forget we've got these regular small tyres. What you're going to find is the experience of landing seems pretty similar regardless of whether you've got those fat tyres on or not. And so here we can see just a little bit closer some of that interaction at a lower speed between the aircraft model and particularly the tyres and the surface, and we've clearly got the terrain mesh is significant here. We've got definite undulations. We've also got rocks which look like solid objects, but you can see the aircraft it's just cutting straight through those. And same deal with the vegetation and the bushes. Again, they're just phantoms, really, holograms if you like. So we have to wonder what it may be that there are different physical processes going on when the aircraft is moving slowly as when we're taxiing here like this, and when the aircraft's touching down, maybe speed regulated, maybe there's different modelling algorithms in play. But here we're definitely interacting essentially with the terrain mesh and pretty much nothing else. It may be that we have an additional layer of processing that knows something about the roughness of the surface. That's quite likely. And then as a last example, we're landing on a really rough strip. Well, it's not a strip at all. This is just a random track out in open country, and we're just going to set up an approach into there, slightly uphill, and see what we see. Again, it's kind of narrow, relatively flat, but when we get close to it we can see it's not flat. The terrain mesh is definitely not flat. It's got some definite undulations there. It looks a lot rougher than that previous track. And so again, we can hypothesize that roughness may translate into a second layer of physical processing that affects the way the aircraft handles and steers. I think the main difficulty in the landing on this surface is that terrain mesh undulation. It's kicking us back up into the air and making it very difficult to stay down, but also to avoid tipping over and getting a prop strike. And just once more, if we try that in the Cessna, we do seem to find, well, again, it's not as different as we would imagine it would be, that if we leave off those giant Tundra tyres. But on balance, it does seem to be a little more tricky to get the Cessna down in one piece. It is possible. Do the tyres make a difference? Well, I'm not sure about that. It's easier to land a Scout on rough terrain than the Cessna, but not by as much as I would have expected. Of course, we do have other factors to consider, like the suspension, and the Cessna, of course, has tricycle gear, so it probably would be worth doing some more experiments. So the changes to ground level terrain in Flight Sim 2024 are probably as big as the introduction of texture mapping and then photo scenery in FS5, which was 30 odd years ago. Is it completely there yet? Well, maybe not, but in Flight Sim 2024, the ability to land off airport certainly adds to the experience of genuine exploration of the Flight Sim world.